The Gilded Age Season 3 is a sad story about a forced marriage between Gladys and the Duke, and the real-life Consuelo Vanderbilt, on whom the story is based, had it so much worse that her wedding day became the darkest day of her life. If you think Bertha is crazy about her insistence and methods of getting Gladys to marry the Duke, then you haven't heard enough about the person she's based on, Alva Vanderbilt, who threatened to shoot Consuelo's secret fiancé, Winthrop Rutherford, just to make her marry the Duke. In the Gilded Age, the secret fiancé turns out to be Billy, whom Bertha firmly declines in favor of her larger plan to make Gladys a titled and respected woman in society. At the end of the Gilded Age 3, Episode 2, Gladys becomes completely helpless as Billy stops fighting for her, and the Duke arrives at their home to make their engagement happen whether she wants it or not. In reality, the story is very much the same, as Consuelo had no choice but to play into her mother's plans, which were more brutal than what we see on the screen. In 1895, Consuelo was an extremely wealthy young lady and was even considered the Gilded Age royalty. The Russells' wealth in the show isn't an exaggeration, as the Vanderbilts inspire the family. As the daughter of William Vanderbilt, Consuelo was worth $4 billion in today's currency, making her a dollar princess ready to be snatched up by the broke but titled Europeans. Consuelo was rich, but she was an American. She couldn't be part of the European aristocracy with titles and tiaras except through marriage, which her mother, Alva, had manipulatively arranged. As other period dramas have pointed out, rich American young girls, popularly called dollar princesses, were marrying European aristocrats in vogue. It was an amusing yet convenient arrangement whereby the lady received a title and the man received the money needed to keep their declining inherited fortune afloat. In the Gilded Age 3, Bertha is very particular about Gladys's having this title, and the Duke desperately wants Gladys's money to keep his estate together. But it wasn't as straightforward as that, because Consuelo was just 18 and wanted to marry for love. Still, her mother convinced her into believing her disobedience was the reason she was becoming sick, even though she made a miraculous recovery for the wedding. Before her mother picked the 9th Duke, they visited Lord and Lady Lansdowne, the Duke of Marlborough's aunt, in Calcutta in 1893. Then, Consuelo made her European debut at a ball thrown by the Duke and Duchess de Gramont in the spring of 1894 before returning home. It gets even crazier because Consuelo had 5 proposals from other responsible European bachelors after her debut. Still, her mother, Alva, wants no one else but the Duke, even though the Englishmen all seem to be looking forward to her dowry and not the romance. The 9th Duke of Marlborough, Charles Churchill, ended up marrying Consuelo after breaking things off with an English lady he had been in love with so that he could get her money. Consuelo made this known in her memoir, The Glitter and the Gold, saying, "It was that afternoon that he must have made up his mind to marry me and to give up the girl he loved, as he told me so tragically soon after our marriage, to live at Blenheim in the pomp and circumstance he considered essential, needed money." So it was not a love marriage, nor the kind where love would later develop in the marriage despite their wedding being the biggest one of the century. The wedding, despite being a huge event with 4,000 invitations sent and 50 choir members, was a disaster before it even started. So, Consuelo finally agreed to marry the Duke because she feared her mother would have a heart attack, or worse, would become a criminal after executing her secret fiancé and be sent to jail, which would be all her fault. But even after she agreed, Alva didn't trust her not to run away, as she had denied permission for any visitors so that they wouldn't sneak in a message from Winthrop. All for a social clout and marriage she didn't even want. Consuelo was kept under intense watch moments before the wedding, and a footman was posted at her door so she wouldn't run. She spent the moments before alone, crying, and the wedding, which took place in New York at St. Thomas Church on 5th Avenue, ended up being delayed for 20 minutes because Consuelo's eyes had swollen from crying so much. And when she arrived at the church with her father, it was apparent that she wasn't happy with the ceremony that many people had come to witness. Despite her moodiness, every other guest was delighted to catch a glimpse of her glamorous wedding dress. Consuelo wore a gown of cream satin that came with a 5-foot-long train trimmed with lace. She also had on a veil and a wreath of orange blossoms. Consuelo also carried an enormous bouquet with an assortment of orchids sent from the groom's Blenheim estate in England. Huge crowds were gathered at the wedding venue on the 6th of November, 1895, and the police had to be called in to control the people. They were given explicit instructions not to use their nightsticks on the guests, as most of them were girls from good families. Eventually, the 9th Duke and Consuelo were united, and he finally secured the funds to renovate and maintain Blenheim Palace, which restored the building to its current appearance. In return, Consuelo was granted the title of Duchess of Marlborough. Shortly after the church wedding, they had a reception at the bride's family home in the Upper East Side, and the headlines carried the news that reads, "She is now a duchess," similar to other news about her gold underwear fastenings for her wedding day, which her mother leaked to the press. However, the biggest shocker is that this wedding is believed to have indirectly contributed to the divorce between her parents, Alva and William, as it occurred in the same year Alva forced Consuelo to marry the Duke. Although the divorce occurred before the wedding, Alva filed for divorce due to William's adultery, and that's why the Gilded Age 3 carries so much weight, as it could be the season when the power couple, Bertha and George, are divorced. George has been a faithful husband even after what happened earlier in the show, so the cause for their divorce might be Gladys's marriage, in which George is sidelined. Soon after their wedding, Consuelo continued to figure out how mismatched their union was. The Duke, whose nickname is Sonny, is the opposite of the name. Consuelo discovered him to be cold and snobbish, and he maintained a particular image. The name Sonny isn't due to his personality, but rather because of his first courtesy title, the Earl of Sunderland. As if that wasn't worse enough, Consuelo found the English community unbearable for their restrictive and outdated ways. Consuelo mentioned that she encountered some prejudice from Europeans, often directed against Americans who were considered to be new money. The high-powered Brits also commented on her long neck, claiming it's a deformity that ruined her beauty. She hated the weather and everything about their marriage, including eating dinners with the Duke, saying, "How I learned to dread and hate these dinners, how ominous and wearisome they loomed at the end of a long day." They endured for a while, but it soon became obvious that it wasn't working. In 1905, when John Singer Sargent painted this portrait of them and their children, it became clear that the marriage wasn't sustainable. In 1906, the couple became separated because they were unable to divorce. In that era, divorce wasn't granted unless it was for a cause or legitimate legal reason, which is why Aurora Fane's husband implored her to claim infidelity so that they would be allowed a divorce in the show. But for Consuelo and the Duke, there was no other reason except that they were both unhappy. However, there was later speculation that Consuelo may have been in the company of another man while she was still married to the Duke, which we will expand on shortly. Consuelo wrote saying, "Desiring to be free, we contemplated divorce, but in England, the divorce laws then existing required a man to prove unfaithfulness in his wife. A wife, however, had to prove physical cruelty as well, and because they couldn't find any of these reasons, the pair chose to live separate lives. However, they were finally able to divorce in 1920 after an update was made in marital law that allowed the wives to file for divorce due to desertion. But again, it wasn't a straightforward process because it required that she prove her husband had slept with another woman and also provide written evidence of her husband rejecting her attempts at reconciliation, which she found humiliating but had to go through. The Duke still received a lot of monetary compensation from the divorce. Their divorce agreement revealed that the Duke was to receive $100,000 per year, which is equivalent to approximately $3.2 million today. The Duke also received $2.5 million in railroad stock, which is now worth roughly $81 million due to inflation. Before their separation and official divorce, Paul César Helot painted a portrait of Consuelo during his visit to Blenheim Palace in 1900. At this point, the Duke wasn't home as he was away fighting in the Boer War, and the portrait is believed to illustrate an intimacy between the painter and the sitter. Helot's daughter strongly believed her father and Consuelo had an affair between 1900 and 1901 while the Duke was away, Day, which was around the time the portrait was created. It continued after Hello returned to Paris, where Consuelo visited and sat for him to be painted again. Although this affair was never proven or confirmed, it was widely known that Hello was Consuelo's friend during a lonely period of her life. His portrait of Consuelo is widely discussed due to its personal nature. Even Consuelo kept this portrait with her for the remainder of her life. However, Consuelo was finally able to marry someone she chose for herself in 1921 after her divorce. She married French industrialist Jacques Balsan and had a happy union until Jacques passed away in 1956.